Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today will be George Plaster of Nashville Sports Radio. We thank our presenting sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Today's news brought to you by Sutherland & Belk, a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland & Belk is committed to fighting for those who've been injured in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt is off this week in football, but kickoff time for the next contest has been set. That will be at South Carolina on November the 2nd. Kickoff time will be 6:30 Central on the SEC Network. Today's guest line presented by our friends at Boll & Branch, which was started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've used Boll & Branch sheets for about 5 or 6 years now. They're fantastic, and I did not know what I was missing until I got them. They are also Fair Trade certified, which means they're made under safe conditions by men and women treated and paid fairly. You can try them free for a month and return them after that if you like. But trust me, as someone who's slept on them for a long time, you will not want to. Once you get the sheets, try the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That's spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy to get $50 off your first set of sheets. George Plaster joins me now. If you are a Vanderbilt fan, you know who he is. He is the former play-by-play voice. He's got his own show on 95.9 FM, Nashville Sports Radio, from 2 to 4 every day. George, I'm excited to have you on the show. This is going to be a regular occurrence, and thank you for doing this.
Chris, I'm thrilled to be doing it. Gosh, the last time I did one of these with you, I sounded like Gravel Gertie. I had lost my voice about halfway through, and I'm just thrilled you'd ask me again.
Well, first of all, whatever your voice sounded like, people enjoyed the last podcast. Second of all, I've listened to you on the airwaves for decades now. You have got a talent for telling it like it is. And on our podcast, I've got guys on from the radio network. Sometimes there are delicate questions that it's hard for my guests to answer, and I don't want to put them in a bad spot. I feel like they give good information, but I feel like having you on the show will be a little bit of an outlet to maybe get some questions answered that don't always get addressed on the podcast, and I think we will do some of that today.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'll say this. It's when you're involved in both being a play-by-play announcer for a team and you're doing a talk show, man, it's hard. I learned that in the mid-'90s. You know, it's easy if your team goes 11-0 or you're the Patriots and all you have to do is praise. But when your team goes 2-9, that kind of thing, boy, it is hard. That was one of the real tap dances that I tried to do during those 4 years. It was very.
Sorry, I hope that we're not having some audio issues here. I lost you for a minute, but I think we got most of that. But to what you just said, I think this sums up. I think sometimes when you're doing this, and I'm not quite in the position that you were in, but a lot of my job depends on access and things. You can't go burn someone to the ground, but you also have an audience that expects you to tell the truth. And like you said, walking that line is a challenge. I find that a lot of times what upsets people the most isn't the things that you're not dead right on, but it's the things that you are dead right on at times.
Yeah, it becomes sort of a deal where you can't win no matter what you do or say. And I'm not sure I fully understood that when I took the job in 95. It just was really hard. And by the end, I had kind of thrown up my hands and said, look, I'm okay with giving this up, even though it had been something that had been a lifetime dream to be that school's announcer. Let me say this. Joe Fisher, who replaced me, has done an unbelievable job. He's had some great moments, But like every Vandy announcer, he's experienced some tough times, and Joe's done a fabulous job with that, and I couldn't be prouder of her.
Yeah, and Joe, sometimes you can hear it in his voice a little bit that, okay, what I'm watching right now is ridiculous.
Right, right. He and I will laugh about it at times because you just get into some funny situations. I can remember one time doing a television game where Vandy was down 51-3 at Alabama at halftime, and I looked at Norman Jordan and I was like, "Can we just pull the plug on this thing?" Just funny stuff that happens. Maybe a little gallows humor, but it's part of our business. And one of the things I admire so much about Joe is his professionalism during the tough times. It's easy to be a broadcaster. When your team goes 11-0 and 12-0. Eli Gold's a really good friend of mine, and I told him one time, I said, I want to trade places with you for one game so that you learn how the other half lives. We've laughed about that over the years. That said, Eli is a tremendous announcer, and I love the fact that he's gotten to experience the great moments that he has.
Let's get to the current environment, starting with the football game on Missouri, which I think shocked everyone. What were your impressions of that one?
Well, I was as shocked as everybody else was. I mean, if you did one of those things on a game show where you polled 100 people in the studio audience and said, how many of you think Vanderbilt will beat Missouri? The likelihood is the answer would be zero. And that doesn't make the people that, answer that negative. It's just sort of the way it is. But the beauty of sports, as we learned over the weekend, both with the Vandy game and the Illinois victory over Wisconsin, the beauty of sports is that nothing other than the Patriots is guaranteed. You have to go play the game. And, who knows what Missouri's mental state of mind was going into that game. And frankly, who cares? Because at the end of the season, nobody says, well, you went 6-6. Yeah, but two of the games, the other team didn't care. UNLV didn't roll out of Nashville thinking any less of their victory because they caught Vanderbilt flat. It's just the way it is. Tremendous effort on the defense. Gosh, if they had played that good throughout the season, they might have won a couple of other games, and it might have Derek Mason looking at them going, what changed? What's different?
I don't bet on sports, but if I did, I would have put some money down on Missouri to cover that line. And of course, not only did Missouri not cover that, but it won. And I mean, like you said, in sports, stuff can happen. You mentioned the Patriots, even an undefeated Patriots team lost the Super Bowl. But let's dig into explanations. I think the defense was the biggest thing. I have dug around a little bit. I think that he was telling the truth about Tarver still called the game, but having him up in the booth, he got a different view of things. And I think that Derek, from what I understand, was more involved in the defense. They've got to take that going forward, and I think that's your seed of hope. Now, do I think if they played Missouri again 10 times, they would win more often than not? No, I do not. But I do think that they have found something that might work for them going forward.
Well, it's at least kind of a ray of hope. It gives you something to kind of hang your hat on. Here's the other thing that I think happens in games like that. When a team like Vandy or a team like Illinois hangs around, I think all of a sudden around the middle of the third quarter, the other team says, oh crap, they're not going away. What do? We can't put them away. And I think all of a sudden an Illinois, a Vanderbilt gets the benefit of the other team getting very tight, getting very nervous. And I think that's maybe an ingredient in these upsets that people don't think about, is that the other team maybe comes in a little flat. Maybe they take it all for granted. And all of a sudden there's a wake-up call with sort of this, oh, crap, what do we do now? We're in a battle that we never saw coming, and we really haven't prepared for it.
Speaking of that, I was exchanging texts with a good buddy of mine on that beat yesterday. And my impression of Barry Odom is that he's a pretty good football coach. I think he's done a good job at Missouri. They've gotten better every year. I thought they were headed towards contention, maybe for the SEC title until this weekend. I think it's going to be hard for them. But I did not realize this. They've lost 10 games as a favorite in the last 4 years. And that's the second one they have lost is a three-score favorite. The other one being Wyoming.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't realize the numbers that you put out there, but I would assume at the end of the season that Barry Odom, if he's smart, will gather his captains for a meeting and say, hey, guys, here are the facts. Tell me why you think this is happening. Is it something we're doing? Are you all taking things for granted? Do we need to make things tougher on you on the weeks of a Wyoming or a Vandy? Because, that's something. I mean, what they lost on Saturday was, the front door to the SEC East. I mean, it was theirs. And now all of a sudden they're back in a dogfight. And the last thing in the world they expected was to get into that dogfight because of Vandy.
George, there's a lot of things to talk about with regards to the state of the football program, Derek Mason's job security, and certainly Malcolm Turner and all sorts of things revolving around strategic plans and facilities. Most of those are contained in the mailbag, so I'm going to go ahead and go there if that's cool with you.
Okay, sure. Let's do
Our,
it.
our mailbag is presented by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Are you in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance? What about life or commercial insurance? Josh can help you with all those things. Call him at 615 933 1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him at facebook.com/JD Minton. He's my insurance agent. Hope you will make him yours. Ingold asks, did you go to the Missouri game and when Riley Neal threw the pick on his first play, did you say to yourself, the game's over, same old Vandy?
The answers are no and yes. uh, yeah, when he threw the pick, I was like, oh, Lord, here we go again, just like everybody, which makes their ability to kind of rally back from that moment even better, because when you start losing, I don't care who it is, there becomes an oh no, here we go again moment. It just does.
I was doing a piece yesterday, and I think the point of reference for Vanderbilt football is 1960 on, because that's when they made some decisions that adversely impacted the football program then and continue to reverberate now, which we'll get to Malcolm Turner and fixing that in a few minutes. But my point is, I think any comparison of Vanderbilt football can't be to pre-1960. It's got to be a discussion we have from 1964. They have won 8.8% of their games against ranked opponents. They went from 1960 through the end of the 1973 season, they won one time. That's the Alabama game that 50 years later everybody still talks because there's really not a lot to discuss in between in terms of successes. So what I'm getting at is that's a game that historically, and even as I watched them in the 80s and 90s, you just knew that when they had a lead in that point, it was always just around the corner, the collapse. And that's the point where that's the kind of play that they always collapsed under. And I feel like under James Franklin, really under Bobby Johnson, I think it was, they started winning some of those. Bobby beat 3 teams that were ranked in 2008, which nobody, by the way, has done that. No coach in Vanderbilt history since 60 has won more than one game against a ranked team in a season. Bobby won 3 that year. This is a long-winded
Well,
way of saying it seems like in the last 15 years, whereas you knew that they could not win that game, something has happened within that program where they finally believe again.
let's go back. You brought up the mid 80s. I was a sideline announcer, young and a lot thinner back then. And, I could see it down on the sideline where there would be that look of, uh-oh, here we go again. And a lot of times back then it was just simply depth. You know, They just were completely worn out by the time it was over. I'm not sure that I felt like depth is the killer as much as it used to be, because it was obvious that was the killer back then. You brought up James Franklin. I think the single biggest thing that he was able to do here, and I suspect, I've never asked him this, but I suspect that a lot of it was he did a lot of watching of film before he ever got with that team. All of a sudden, he gets named the head coach. He pops in the film, and he sees some things that he doesn't like. And to me, what he saw was about twice or three times a year, they would lay an egg that was completely inexplicable. And I think by the time he got with that team, he basically said, I'm not going to accept it. I'm not going to put up with it. And if you do it to me, there will be repercussions, and they will be severe. And I think from the minute he got there, there was an understanding. There's a new sheriff in town. He's not going to put up with our playing hard at home, but not playing as hard on the road, that kind of stuff that I think it played them. And I think he just knocked that door down more effectively than any Vanderbilt coach in my lifetime.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. But if you want a crazy stat, and I did not realize this till I researched it yesterday, Derek has a higher winning percentage against ranked teams than Franklin did.
Wow. And, I mean, let's face it, one of the things that Derek has had to fight is he's the guy that was replacing James Franklin. And all of a sudden, instead of what most coaches have dealt with, which is no expectations, no pressure, all of a sudden there were expectations of, well, James Franklin got us to 9 victories and, we expect this, that, and the other. And Mason has dealt with expectations that no other Vandy football coach in my lifetime has dealt with.
Yeah, definitely true. I mean, that is such a strange chapter, and we could do a whole podcast about that, because in some ways the job that he took over was, he being Derek, way easier than the one any other coach had taken over. In some ways it was tougher because of the Vandenberg scandal. But anyway, let's move on to the next thing here, because we've got a lot of ground to cover. Door
Okay.
fan wants to know, barring a miracle finish, will Derek Mason remain the head coach for next season?
Well, it depends on what week you ask the question. A week ago, I would have absolutely said 70-30, he's gone, because I didn't think this team could do anything to help him. And again, this is the beauty of sports. None of us saw this coming. So all of a sudden now we've had to recalibrate. What does a win over Missouri do for Derek Mason? Well, certainly the first thing is it turns down the heat, like shutting off a water faucet. It turns off the heat for now a bunch. He'll probably get a win against East Tennessee State. Here is he as far as, but that's the kind of victory, if he could get it in Knoxville, that I think would guarantee he's back. I'd say it's at least 50-50 that he is coming back. Here's the thing. I don't think Malcolm Turner is dying to get rid of Derek Mason. He's got way more problems on his plate to have to address. And if you listen to the interview when I had him on last week on the show, you kind of got a little bit of that he was non-committal, but I don't get the feeling he's just dying to pull this trigger.
No, and that's the conversation I had with another person in the press box in the media this week, and I think he said, it's kind of like, come on, Derek, I want to keep you, but give me something here. Give me a little something that I can go with. I think the Missouri game was what you said. It was the thing that sort of, for lack of a better term, kept the Wolves away for another week. Because I'm with you. I don't think that he wants to make a change because of all the other things, and we'll get into those in just a minute. But let's face it, if they had finished the season 1-11, 2-10, I don't know that he would have had much of a choice.
Right. And that's, it's one of the crazy things in sports is that there's not a one of us who saw that win coming if we're honest with ourselves. Now, what do I think Derek Mason may have done that set it in motion? He may have sort of attacked their pride sometime between Sunday and Friday to say, are you really no better than this UNLV effort? Because if that's really what you are, you're probably a bunch of losers. And, he probably got to their pride. There probably were a few private meetings amongst players where they said, you know what, he's right. Who knows what level we are, but we're certainly better than this.
Vandy Fitz says, assuming the football team doesn't win out or win all but one and then in a bowl game, in other words, assuming the football team doesn't go to a bowl, basically, what are the positives and negatives of keeping Mason around for a seventh season?
Well, one of the factors that's an ugly factor, but it probably has to get discussed, is the fact that Malcolm Turner has already fired Bryce Drew, and he's had to dip into athletic department funds to make that buyout occur. What I don't know is if he wanted to fire Derek Mason, does he have the money to do it of his own athletic department funds? And if he doesn't, is the university willing to help him on it? That is a factor, and we don't know the answer to those questions. That's one of the first things that goes on. You hear all this stuff about continuity. I don't buy any of that. I don't think you keep a coach just for continuity's sake. I'm trying to think what would the benefits be of it. First of all, I think he scored himself some points with some Vanderbilt people in that fiery interview that he did after the Missouri win, where he basically said, I want this job, and I'm the right man for this job, and I want to keep this job. Well, I think that resonated with some Vanderbilt people saying, you know what, oftentimes we've had coaches that are looking to get out of here. Here's one that's saying he wants to be here. That probably went over pretty well. Now, I'm not sure the part about don't question me was his smartest move, but I think the other one, the fieriness, probably got some people's attention, and a lot of them probably liked it.
Who do you think that whole speech was aimed at?
I don't know. I mean, there's probably 5 or 6 people. Malcolm Turner might be one. Dawn Davenport might be one. I don't know. Maybe I might be one. Different radio stations that talk this stuff 24 hours a day might be one. Who knows? He's probably never going to tell us. That's a great question. I just don't know the answer.
Door King wants to know, do you know anything about the chancellor search? Are they taking athletics into consideration at all? I think that is yet another piece against the backdrop of all this stuff. And boy, there are so many pieces here. But that is one that I think has caused some uncertainty around everything, around making coaching changes, around athletic strategic plans and what they can or cannot do. That's one piece that we don't talk about enough, that I think everybody's kind of holding their breath to say, how does that turn out?
Yeah, and I don't think anybody knows at this point. They continue to do the search, whatever that means. But here's the thing that I would say, Chris, this can't be anything but better than what they had. Nick Zeppos was a complete zero when it came to helping athletics. I can't find one real instance where I thought, okay, here's a chancellor that really supports athletics. I'm not talking about him showing up for pep rallies after the baseball team wins the national title. I'm talking about support financially and otherwise that could help Vanderbilt athletics be better. I don't think he did any of that. Now, he talked a good game when he came into it, kept telling me that he wanted to go on my show a lot, just like Gordon Gee did. In the end, he wouldn't do any of that. I don't see that he did anything to help athletics. So virtually anything has got to be better. And the hope is that they get somebody who really understands what I believe is an important thing in colleges, which is if you're going to be a great school, you should strive to be great at everything. And they have not strived, if that's a word, to be great in athletics. It's been more lip service, and it's been more just don't embarrass us.
I was thinking this morning, I think if they tear down the football stadium and build a new one, it would be funny if they would like paint Zeppos's face on the wrecking ball.
Wow. So that came up in a dream.
It just was a random breakfast thought this morning. I think I probably need to maybe get my head screwed on better when I wake up in the morning. But I mean, I guess you could say that about Joe Wyatt too. I don't know why that popped into my head, but it just did.
Here's the thing, Chris. I guess maybe for a change, I'm looking at something from a positive. I don't see how it can be any worse than Nick Zeppos. I can't find one thing that he did that dramatically helped Vanderbilt athletics. Now, he talked a good game going in, and sure, he'd show up when the baseball team would win the national title, and he'd lead the pep rally. But that's not what I'm talking about. They need a chancellor athletically who meets with the athletic director, what your needs are, what can I, you know, the attitude needs to be that if you're going to be a great school, you strive to be great at everything. And that really hasn't been the case at Vandy. It's been more of a, we strive to be great at a lot of things, but when it comes to athletics, just don't embarrass us. And that has been the attitude for way too long.
I'm thinking back to my wrecking ball idea. You know, they used to raise money to paint the mural of the coaches thing. I wonder if we could get that off the ground for a wrecking ball painting.
You're really in on this, aren't you?
I think I am. I think I've hit on something. But seriously,
Well, let's come up with the right character.
absolutely. Uh, the chancellor search. Okay, this was homecoming weekend. I talked to some people that were in on various events and meetings, and the chairman of the board, was it Bruce Evans, I think, spoke. And look, on the chancellor search, I think that's a very narrow group of people that is making the choice there and keeping it pretty quiet. I don't know how much will leak out. I do know this. The thing that has come up time and time again, they put this everywhere they can on their website, wherever, and they say diversity and inclusion is far and away their biggest priority. It was claimed this weekend that when they solicit alumni, that's what they hear constantly is the top priority. Now, I will tell you this. I talk to a lot of alums. That never, ever comes up when I talk to them. Now, I do talk to a very different segment of the alumni population, being the one that is concerned with sports, but I think that is a clue to where they're going. Whether that means they hire a minority chancellor or not, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think that is far and away the issue, and that is something that they've put out there in front of everybody, and they continue to say.
Well, I guess I would throw this back and say I don't care if the person is black, white, purple, green. I just want somebody who's good. And I don't care what color that person is, male, female, whatever. Um, to me, the important issue is to get it right and get somebody that cares. To me, that's the bottom line. Just get somebody who cares.
Door fan wants to know your impressions of Malcolm Turner. Do you think we will look back and think that his hiring was a turning point in Vanderbilt football and men's hoops?
Chris, I had a little bit of a head start on getting to know Malcolm Turner. One of my best buddies played high school basketball with him down in Atlanta. And so my buddy reached out to me the day Malcolm Turner got hired and said, listen, this is a really good human being that they've hired try to get to know him. And so I reached out to him fairly early. We had breakfast, really liked him, very decent human being. The question I have is he going to be able to sway a board of trust that, other than John Ingram, I'm not sure has really done anything more than pay lip service to what goes on athletically? I guess the question is he persuasive enough to get to them where other athletic directors in the past have failed? Because he needs significant help from the board of trust. Certainly they will reach out to constituents for whatever facilities improvements they want. They'll be looking for money, but this is also a time where the university needs to step up and say, we're going to put some money where our mouth is too. And he needs that desperately. And, only time will tell whether, he's got more persuasive powers than those who have come before him, or in particular, the stadium situation has become such an embarrassment that they have no choice but to act.
It's funny. Somebody put up a thread on our message board, and we've got a really good community of posters. I mean, we've got all types. We've got townies and gownies, or whatever you want to call them. We've got wealthy alums. We've got off the street fans that don't have much money to buy tickets even. But so we get a good cross section of the fan base, and it's really interesting. And with the last week, with the rumors of they might be making a coaching change, and you had the weird remarks to the media that he made after the game. You had the 2 weeks before in football that were disastrous, in what's not been a good season. You have this thing with facilities. You had the coaching change in basketball. You got a women's basketball coach that might need to be gone after this season. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, somebody made the point. It's like it's a big soap opera right now. and people were like, what do we title this thing? And I think somebody came up with the perfect title, and it was Malcolm in the Middle. And I think that is, if you want to sum this thing up in so many words, I think that's a pretty good start.
Well, first of all, Chris, just imagine trying to take that job, and then
oh man,
you're having
yes,
you're having to prioritize. What problems need to be fixed first, and how do we go about doing it? And the first time I had breakfast with him, that was one of the things we talked about is, wow, this is certainly not some job where you walk in and, you just sort of are a caretaker. You're winning national titles in football and the money's rolling in and you're selling 100,000 tickets. I mean, if you want a challenge, this is a challenge, unlike many others on the college athletic front. And so I guess the only thing I would say to people is be patient with him, because, gosh, he's got a lot of issues to deal with.
Vandy Nash says, do you think Vanderbilt's administration is truly committed to supporting a drastic change in support of its athletic program? Is this really a new day, and will they let Malcolm Turner pursue his vision?
Deep down, I don't believe it. I guess I'm in one of those things like a lot of people my age where I can sit there and say, look, I've been down this road before. I've heard all this stuff before. I'll believe it when I see it. What's different? You've got a new athletic director. He's younger. He's hopefully got the persuasive powers to, if nothing else, shame the board of trust into something better than what they've given in the past. But, to answer the question, I'm in sort of that category of I'll believe it when I see it.
I want to go back to that because I actually have a different answer for that. But that fan base, after the last 2 weeks heading into the Missouri game, I think they reached a level of almost depression that I've not seen. And look, that's a fan base that has had cause for depression. I think before they could kind of tiptoe along and say, hey, if we pick up a winning season every decade, we'll just rejoice in that. It's the best we could do. You have James Franklin comes in, he turns everything upside down. He throws away that excuse. You have Tim Corbin doing what he's done. I think sunshine, a lot of times it's the best disinfectant, but sometimes when you shine light on an issue that, hey, you can win in sports, and then you have what happened with football season to the start of this on the tail end of basketball season, it has just been a weird spot. And I think a lot of people like you are just so cynical. And it's like we just cannot believe anything till we see it anymore.
I also think that happens in sports. Um, as a Braves fan, all these people were like, "Oh, I bet he's depressed when they didn't win Game 5." And I've come to the attitude in sports that if you're going to be kind of a diehard fan the way I am with the Braves, that you've just got to accept. First of all, you've got to appreciate when there are good times, but also understand that when things don't go your way, don't fall off the cliff. I think when it comes to Vandy, you brought up a really interesting point. 35 years ago, George McIntyre probably ended up being his own worst enemy. Once that 82 team went to the Hall of Fame game and beat Tennessee, it ratcheted up a level of expectations that he really could not meet. And so he probably got shown the door back then because his own, achievements in 82 put him into a position that he couldn't sustain.
George, I lost you for a minute there, so I apologize if I'm cutting you off. I wanted to give some feedback on the issue of the question that was just asked regarding the stadium and commitment. Everything that I hear privately from people I trust continues to suggest that they're really going to pour kind of a mind blowing level of resources into this. At least that's what Malcolm is aiming for. They've got a consulting firm. I was told, oh man, August of 2018 that, look, wait, it may be a long time before we roll stuff out, but things really are changing around here. There's going to be some big things happening. I can't tell you what those things are going to be. Everything that I hear privately indicates that is the direction that they are going. These are not going to be quick fixes. They are not going to be cheap makeovers. They're going to be real fixes and substantial fixes. At the same time, I think other than the chancellor, which we mentioned, that's something everybody's holding their breath on a little bit. The other issue is they've got to present this plan to the board. I think that's going to happen probably January or February, so it's got to be approved. So I think that's the other variable. I think they are aiming really high with this thing. But that's the other thing that we just don't know is how is that going to be met?
Well, let me say this. I hope you're right. I mean, I would love nothing better than to see what you've brought up here. The question is, how does it get funded? I think if the university just does we need all our donors to pitch in for us to get this done. I think a big chunk of this has to come from them. It has to come from the school. The school has the money. It's just a matter of approving it. I guess I wonder what will have changed that would make the board of trust suddenly realize they've got to do something. And I do wonder if the series of articles that the Tennessean did back a couple of summers ago about the condition of the stadium started to get to them. I know on the air, I would oftentimes ask the question, why hasn't Greg Sankey, contacted Nick Zeppos to say, look, we're giving you $43 million a year. I expect something better than the look of this stadium. And I want a plan in my hands in the next 60 to 90 days of how you intend to fix this. I guess there's a cynical part of me that wonders why why the commissioner hasn't done that. Has it forced the issue to say, look, we want you, but we don't want a stadium that's an embarrassment. Football's too important to us.
Yeah, I agree with you. I always wondered if that conversation had ever been had. I have no evidence to think that it was, but and I think the league should have stepped in before the Tennessean did. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. With that, I will go to the next thing. Raiders 1967 asks, if you were the athletic director at Vanderbilt, how would you approach the football stadium? Would you aim for a new stadium that holds between 30 to 35,000 fans?
Well, first of all, I think the 35,000 number, 40,000 number is the right one. They certainly don't need any more than that. I think what you're looking for are some of the amenities that the Titans have with their stadium, the Predators have with the arena, where you have suites, you have concourses with more concession stands, better restroom facilities, that kind of thing. I think the preference would be that it's an on-campus facility. I think the fans spoke up more loudly than I thought they about wanting a stadium on campus. So I think that's important. Um, I'm trying to think. Anything in that question that I've missed?
Well, really, it hits the heart of what that looks like. I think you could make one of those covered European style stadiums, which, let's face it, half or two-thirds your season in football, it's pretty darn hot here. I mean, you had some 90-degree kickoff games this year at a time where people are going more and more away from attending games. I think you need something like that to give fans a reason. I don't know what the zoning ordinances are. I know that Vanderbilt used to host a ton of concerts, and I think the noise complaints in the neighborhood may have driven some of those away. I don't claim to be an insider on that at all, but I'm thinking, could you combine what you're already going to do with something where you can have outdoor concerts or something of that sort? Because, some are held at the Titans Stadium. That's huge, but if it rains or something like that, then your experience is kind of ruined. Starwood is no longer around. I wonder if there's a way to do this thing and cover it or make it a little bit nicer in a way that you could also host some other events and make back some of the revenue that you would be spending, of course, to build such a thing. In other words, there's a way to make some of your money back outside of football if you do this thing right and you do a new thing.
Well, it's a great point. I just don't know the dollar figures of doing one style as opposed to another style, and how much bigger the price tag is, because ultimately price tag is going to matter.
I think it will. I'm anxious to see how far the board is willing to go. Again, everything I've indicated makes me think that they're going to spend a lot of money on this. But again, I think everybody's also holding their breath to see how that turns out. Door fan says, in your opinion, what's the likelihood Vanderbilt will break ground on a new stadium or dramatic redesign of Vanderbilt Stadium before the end of 2021 or before the end of 2022?
Well, I mean, I hope that the odds are good. I'm going to go back to where I've been, which is cynical. Um, it just says I've been around a long time. I'll believe all this when I see it, and that way maybe I'm not as disappointed as some other people might be. I'll believe all this when I see it, but I also will, sort of go with the information you've got, because you cover this a lot closer than I do now. Hopefully we are in some sort of a new day, and stuff's going to happen. I hope so.
Yeah, the problem they were supposed to do this a few years ago. The athletic department was supposed to be included in the capital campaign. It never happened. So I think at this point, I don't think little fixes are going to appease a fan base. I think for the first time, I think that you might just see a lot of people just walk away from them. Now, I think the hope, too, is I think you have a little bit of new blood on the board. I had a source tell me last week, I think the board cares more about sports, at least the board as it is comprised now, than people think. They've got a guy on the board now, and I can't think of his name, but he was big into UFC. He's a younger guy. He's got some money. He's into sports. I think that could be a factor. So I do think there are some changing dynamics there too.
Yeah, I don't pretend to know. I don't guess I hang out with a lot of the board members. Um, I've always admired John Ingram, and I appreciate the fact that he's been the one board member over the years that you knew did care about athletics. Look, I hope it's a new day. Here's one of the things I told Malcolm Turner that I think is very important as far as fan base issues, because we know that the school's got a big fan base issue. They have got to start forcing coaches to get out into this community, to speak to all the civic clubs, to go do all of that kind of stuff. Because if you look, Bryce Drew didn't do any of it. I laugh. Kevin's a great friend of mine. He hated doing that kind of stuff. And yet when he did it, he was really good at it, which is where I used to get all over him and say, why don't you do more of this? You're really good at it. Derek has not done a lot of this. Best as I can tell, Jerry Stackhouse has not done a lot of this. And I told Malcolm Turner the first time I met him, I said, if I'm the athletic director, if I'm going to hire coaches, that's one of the criteria. We've got a fan base issue, and we've got to start attacking it.
Ingold says, what were your thoughts on Vanderbilt terminating Coach Bryce Drew and your thoughts on the Jerry Stackhouse hire?
After having breakfast with Malcolm Turner, I that Bryce Drew was in. I think under the whole Bryce Drew thing, once the injury to Darius Garland occurred, at some point that team had to get past that and start getting better. The fact of it is they didn't get one bit better. And I think Malcolm Turner sort of took that into account and said, that's not going to be good enough. And when you go 0 for whatever it was, 0 for 19, all bets are off in athletics these days. It's just, that's the way it is. So that was the first part. What was the second part of the question?
What'd you think about Jerry Stackhouse?
It was an interesting hire that probably none of us really saw coming. I'm not sure that I would have taken that gamble. If I'm a new athletic director, I think I'm going to go for something that's more proven on the college level. That said, that doesn't mean that Jerry Stackhouse won't be really good. There's probably a tape of somebody saying that at Florida years ago when Jeremy Foley hired Billy Donovan when he was 30 years old. Why take that chance when you've got proven, experienced coaches? There's nothing to gauge so far. I wish he would have been out in the public more, doing more. There's not the kind of buzz for a new coach that you would wish for. That would be the one thing that I would throw out there.
George, I've got a couple of throwback questions if you've got just a couple minutes as we wrap things up here.
Sure, let's do it.
Via Superior says, did your Vanderbilt career overlap with Jerry DiNardo or Eddie Fogler, and what are some impressions and stories you can share there?
Yeah, let's start with Fogler, who obviously I had a great relationship with, and so much so that we hired him to do a 1 hour gig every Thursday in my old 1045 days. Loved Fogler. Just really became close with him. We sort of had a common bond. Neither one of us thought much of Paul Houlihan. And as that went along, that got stronger and stronger. With DiNardo, for about 3 years, I didn't really know him. And then Jerry ended up having a media barbecue at his house. I want to say it was in the summer before his 4th year. And he and I had never really dealt with each other at all. His assumption was, I was a Watson Brown guy. I was not happy with the way that had gotten handled. And what ended up happening on his patio, I think he found out that, I wasn't part of the Communist Party. I found out that he wasn't the devil on earth. And, from that point on, we really enjoyed getting to know each other. I'll never forget when LSU hired him. Joe Dean Jr. was Joe Dean Sr. was the athletic director at LSU, and I had known Joe Dean Sr. since I was about 8 years old. And apparently, during the interview, he asked DiNardo, "Do you know George Plaster?" And DiNardo said yes, and I guess he was shocked that it came up because he called me shortly after that. He said, "How do you know Joe Dean Sr.?" And I kind of told him, and he said, "Well, it came up during the interview." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." Jerry, if you hear him on the Big Ten Network, he does a really good job with that. Both he and Watson Brown are terrific broadcasters. Now, it's easy for me to say that because Watson's on my show, but I think people who have heard him know that, and people who have heard Jerry know that too.
In Gold says, can you give us a down and dirty story about ex-athletic director Paul Houlihan? And he also says C.M. Newton and Willie Donick as well. So however far do you want to
Okay.
go with that, I'll give you the floor, and that'll be the last question today.
Okay. With Houlihan, after he fired Watson Brown, he and I really went at it about the way it was done. I mean, it was kind of sneaky. And I was up in Reds game. This would have been in May, I want to say 91. And my dad calls me. I had one of those Motorola looking cell phone jobbies, the big old, ridiculous looking things. And my dad called me and he said, Houlihan's going to fire you. And I said, "Well, no kidding, Dad." I said, "Why are you telling me that?" And he said, "Well, it's in the paper." And on the way back from Cincinnati, and I was prepared for it, Houlihan called me and said, "You need to set up a meeting with my secretary." And I said, "Paul, I don't need to set up a meeting." I said, "If you want to fire me, just go ahead and do it, and I'll save the gas money." I said, "But understand that, I'm not going away. I'm an alum. I have a microphone, and that can be a pretty good little combination. And you need to kind of think about this before you just go off half-cocked about it." With Coach Newton, gosh, I mean, we could go on forever as to my feelings about him. It's one of the most bittersweet honors in the world to be asked to speak at his funeral, uh, and trying to figure out whether to be serious in that talk or whether to tell some of the funny stories, because he and I reached a point, um, you know, probably 15, 20 years ago, where we started pulling a lot of pranks on each other. And he loved that kind of stuff. He loved going to dinner and getting into arguments that would be great on sports talk shows. And he and I and Mike Petroni had some of the funniest sessions that nobody would believe, if you ever had any of them on tape. But the bottom line is, I have no idea how in the world I was lucky enough to have a friendship with a man who had achieved at the level he had achieved. I was down in the gutter, and he was a guy that, was picking the U.S. Olympic basketball team. But that was the beauty of Coach Newton, is I don't think he cared what your status was in life. He just was a really good human being. He helped more people in athletics than anybody that I've ever known. So you're darn right. I'm his biggest cheerleader. On Willie, I met Willie his senior year at Vandy. He had just left basketball to concentrate on baseball. And when I met him, I realized that he had a lot of the same useless information, stats, trivia that I did. And we immediately hit it off talking baseball. He was a walking encyclopedia of that kind of stuff. And so I made the decision to try to help him. I believed that there was a broadcaster in there somewhere, and that with a little help from somebody like me, that we could get that to happen. And I can remember early on when I put him on the air, a lot of people were like, "You need to get him off. He doesn't sound good. He's not good enough." And I kept saying, "Look, be patient. That this guy's got something." And I can't tell you how proud I am when I watch him do a Predator game. He's very smooth. I have no idea where he learned the hockey smoothness. I will admit I taught him some things about how to do a basketball game or a football game, but on hockey, man, it's all his own. And he's done a terrific job. And, when I get a chance to hear him, I just, I end up with a big grin on my face because he's just done incredible stuff.
Okay, I didn't mean to lie, but I did. I did have one more question, and this
Okay.
shouldn't take long. World Series starts tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just me? I've got this crazy, sneaky feeling that the Nationals are going to do this thing.
I wouldn't put it past them because, first of all, they're one team. They're the one team. Maybe one team isn't fair, but they are one team that can go toe to toe with the Astros in pitching. Scherzer is a warrior. He used to be more of a warrior. He always had the natural stuff. And Patrick Corbin, big 6'7" left-hander, freakish athlete, got a slider that's deadly. So they can go toe to toe with what Houston can offer, which is Garrett Cole and Verlander, and a Zach Greinke that frankly has not been very good in the postseason. The other thing about the Nats is every time Juan Soto comes up with something on the line, he delivers. He's a 20-year-old who, if Ronald Acuna didn't exist, you'd be hearing so much more about Juan Soto. I think the series goes 6 or 7, and I wouldn't rule out that the Nats win it all.
Hey, George, thank you so much for your time today. I am really looking forward to doing these with you every week. You have your own show on 95.9 FM. I want to give you the floor to talk about that, what you've got coming up, and anything else that you'd like to promote as we close today.
Chris, thank you. You mentioned the FM signal. We also have 560 on AM. I've got Watson Brown as part of the show and Terry McCormick, TitanInsider.com as well. They have really been good. I try very hard to take advantage of Watson's skills in scheming up offense. It's easy to do, especially when you're talking about the Titans and what you think they ought to be doing and what you don't think they ought to be doing. His analysis of Marcus Mariota, along with Terry's historical knowledge of where it all got to this. Last week, some of the best radio that I've heard, and just ask the questions and let them do the work.
George, thank you so much. We'll catch you again next week.
Chris, remind me next week to tell you the C.M. Newton story about hiring Hal Mummy. It's absolutely, it is. Let's just say it's Coach Newton got one step ahead of me in the pranks around the Hal Mummy hiring. So just.
Well, knowing what I know about Hal Mummy, that one won't be dull.
No. Oh, it's absolutely priceless.
Thank you, George.
Talk to you, Chris.
He's George Plaster. I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We'll have more coming later in the week.